The stench of congealed blood still clung to the damp stones of the tower at Tiffauges when the Duke of Brittany's soldiers forced open the wrought iron doors. It was October 1440, and the autumn wind carried more than fallen leaves. It carried whispers of horror that would echo through the centuries. In the castle dungeons, where sunlight never penetrated, investigators found evidence of atrocities that defied human comprehension of evil. Fragments of small bones, dark stains that even the rains couldn't wash away, and a deathly silence that seemed to scream the agonies of dozens of innocent children. Who could imagine that this place of terror had been the refuge of one of the most powerful men in France? Gilles de Rais, Marshal of France, hero of Orléans, comrade in arms of Joan of Arc, had become something far worse than a monster. He had become a demon incarnate, thirsting for children's blood and worshipping the deepest darkness. But it wasn't always so. Just 2 decades earlier, Gilles de Rais walked the golden halls of the royal palace with the confidence of a man bearing the weight of glory. His imposing figure, over 6 feet tall, commanded any room he entered. His blonde hair fell in waves over broad shoulders, framing a face that ladies of the court considered almost angelically beautiful. His blue eyes, then crystalline as spring water, reflected the unwavering determination of a warrior born to command armies and conquer impossible battles. The young baron had inherited not only vast lands stretching from Brittany to Anjou, but also a fortune that rivaled the king's own. 15 castles dotted his domains like jewels on a golden crown. Tiffauges, Champtocé, Machecoul, each name evoked power, wealth, and influence. Thousands of vassals worked his lands, and his annual income exceeded that of many entire kingdoms. At 20, Gilles de Rais was not just one of the richest men in France. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of ambition and charisma seemingly destined to shape the kingdom's fate. His meteoric rise began when the trumpets of war sounded across France, calling all honorable men to defend the homeland against the English invaders. The 100 Years' War had turned the kingdom into a bloody battlefield where every victory cost rivers of blood, and every defeat meant entire villages given to the flames. It was in this apocalyptic setting that Gilles de Rais found his natural element. On the muddy plains of Patay, where mud mingled with English blood, he rode like a demon of war, his gleaming sword cleaving the air with the lethal precision of lightning. His men followed him with fanatical devotion, knowing that where Gilles de Rais fought, victory would soon follow. His courage was legendary, his strategy brilliant, and his thirst for glory seemed endless. Alongside Joan of Arc, the mysterious peasant girl who claimed to hear divine voices, he participated in the siege of Orléans, the battle that would forever change the course of the war. Joan herself had placed almost maternal trust in him, seeing in the young baron not only a skilled warrior, but a man of unwavering faith. Gilles possesses the strength of 1,000 men and the purity of an angel, she reportedly said, according to the chroniclers of the time. How bitter those words would sound to those who knew the fate awaiting this warrior angel. When the Maid of Orléans was captured by the English and burned alive at the stake in Rouen, something inside Gilles de Rais died with her. Witnesses reported that he stood throughout the execution, his gloved hands gripping his sword hilt so tightly that his knuckles turned bone white. Silent tears streamed down his face, but these were not tears of ordinary sadness. They were tears of something far deeper and more dangerous, utter disillusionment with God. The castle of Tifage, his favorite residence, began to exude a sinister atmosphere that didn't go unnoticed by visitors. The old tapestries depicting saints and glorious battles were replaced with strange symbols and disturbing images. Black candles burned in silver candelabras, and the air always carried a sickly sweet smell that no one could identify. Servants whispered among themselves about screams echoing from the highest towers in the dead of night, and how the lord of the castle had changed. His eyes, once blue as the sky, now seemed dark as bottomless pits. It was during this period of spiritual decline that Gilles de Rais met Francesco Prelati, a young Italian cleric who presented himself as an expert in the occult. Prelati was a fascinating and repulsive figure, gaunt like a greyhound, with long fingers and perpetually dirty nails. He possessed a smile that never reached his eyes. He claimed to know ancient secrets, formulas for summoning demons, and rituals that could restore Gilles de Rais' fortune and power. The Italian brought with him not only forbidden knowledge, but also a corrupting influence that would dramatically accelerate the Marshal's downfall. Under his guidance, Gilles began practicing increasingly complex and blasphemous rituals. Initially, these were merely ceremonies involving animal blood and invocations in corrupted Latin. But Prelati constantly whispered in his patron's ear that the demons demanded more, significant sacrifices. What followed was an escalation of horror that would defy humanity's capacity to comprehend evil. Child after child began to disappear in the vicinity of Gilles de Rais' castles. They were always the most vulnerable. Orphans, the children of poor peasants, boys and girls whom no one would search for very diligently. The modus operandi was always the same: lure them with promises of food, work, or small gifts, bring them inside the castle, and never see them leave again. Gilles had developed a perversely efficient system. His accomplices, men like Gilles de Sille and Roger de Briqueville, scoured the nearby villages identifying potential targets. They studied the families, identifying the most neglected children, those whose absence would take longer to be noticed. Then, using their position as respected nobles, they approached the victims with convincing stories about job opportunities at the castle, or how the generous baron was looking for pages for his court. The children, dazzled by the possibility of escaping poverty, followed their executioners willingly. Many of them probably died still dreaming of a better life, never truly understanding what was happening to them. Others, more clever or simply unluckier, realized the danger too soon and spent their last moments in absolute terror. The rituals that Gilles de Rais performed with these children were of a cruelty that defies any civilized description. According to the accounts from his own trial, he was not content with simply killing. He tortured, mutilated, and abused his victims in ways that would turn any normal person into a lunatic. He gouged out eyes, cut off fingers, opened bellies, and ripped out still beating hearts, all while reciting blasphemous prayers and begging the demons to grant him power and wealth. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this whole story is that Gilles de Rais was not an uncontrolled lunatic. He continued to function perfectly in society, fulfilling his obligations as a nobleman, participating in religious ceremonies, and corresponding with other members of the aristocracy. During the day, he could be seen politely conversing with visitors, managing his lands, and even showing genuine affection for his own legitimate children. At night, he transformed into something that had no name in any human language. This frightening duality was witnessed by his own servants, who lived in a state of constant terror. Many of them knew exactly what happened in the castle dungeons, but did not dare denounce their lord. Some out of fear of reprisals, others out of direct complicity, and some simply because they did not believe anyone would take such extreme accusations against a war hero and personal friend of the king seriously. Etienne Coriolat, known as Poitou, was one of Gilles de Rais's closest servants and witnessed horrors that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In his testimony during the trial, he described how his lord played with the children before killing them, how he laughed while they begged for mercy, and how he sometimes ordered the bodies to be burned in the castle ovens to eliminate any evidence. Poitou also reported how Gilles de Rais had become addicted to the act of killing itself. He needed more and more victims to feel the same satisfaction, and his methods became progressively more elaborate and cruel. He had developed a specific ritual where he forced the children to watch the death of others before their own turn came, feeding on the terror in their eyes like a vampire feeds on blood. As the years passed, Gilles de Rais's reputation began to deteriorate even among his peers. Sinister rumors circulated in the French court, whispers about unexplained disappearances and about strange changes in the behavior of the former hero. His physical appearance also began to reflect the rot of his soul. His once angelic face had become cadaverous, his eyes sunken and permanently bloodshot, and his hands trembled constantly, as if they were always stained with invisible blood. His finances, consumed by extravagant spending and costly rituals, completely collapsed. Castles were sold, lands mortgaged, and family jewels pawned to fund his demonic obsession. Gilles de Rais, once the wealthiest man in France, now lived on the brink of bankruptcy, sustaining his activities only through increasingly desperate loans. This financial desperation, ironically, began to expose his crimes. When he attempted to sell the Church of Saint-Étienne de Mermort, a property he did not legally own, Jean Le Ferron, treasurer to the Duke of Brittany, refused to validate the transaction. Gilles de Rais, consumed by rage and despair, made the fatal mistake of kidnapping Le Ferron in broad daylight, thus violating both church and state laws in an impossible-to-ignore manner. This act of desperation gave the Duke of Brittany, Jean V, the necessary legal justification to investigate Gilles de Rais's activities. What began as an inquiry into financial irregularities quickly morphed into something far more sinister when investigators began connecting the disappearances of children with the Marshal's castles. Pierre de l'Hôpital, president of the ecclesiastical court, conducted a meticulous investigation that revealed the true extent of Gilles de Rais's crimes. Witnesses were summoned, evidence gathered, and slowly a terrifying picture began to emerge. Desperate parents reported the disappearance of their children, servants broke their silence for fear of being considered accomplices, and even some of Gilles's own associates began confessing in the hope of saving their own lives. The trial of Gilles de Rais, which began in September 1440, was one of the most sensational in medieval history. Conducted simultaneously by civil and ecclesiastical courts, it attracted attention from across Europe. The accused himself, once proud and arrogant, appeared before the judges a shadow of his former self, gaunt, pale, his hair graying, and a look of perpetual terror in his eyes. Initially, Gilles de Rais attempted to deny all accusations, claiming they were motivated by envy and political conspiracy. But as evidence mounted and witness after witness recounted his crimes, his defense began to crumble. When confronted with the testimony of Poitou and other servants who described his atrocities in graphic detail, Gilles de Rais finally broke. On October 21, 1440, he publicly confessed his crimes before a packed court. His confession was so detailed and horrific that many spectators fainted or fled the courtroom.
He admitted to killing and torturing hundreds of children, described his satanic rituals in nauseating detail, and begged forgiveness from both God and the families of his victims. But perhaps the most shocking aspect of his confession was the complete absence of genuine remorse. Gilles de Rais wept profusely as he spoke, but his tears seemed to be more of self-pity than true repentance. He appeared more disturbed by having been caught than by the lives he had destroyed. When questioned about the exact number of his victims, Gilles de Rais replied that he had lost count, but estimated it to be well over 40, perhaps 80, perhaps 140. This casual response regarding hundreds of destroyed human lives revealed the true depth of his monstrosity. The sentence was pronounced on October 25, 1440. Gilles de Rais was condemned to death for murder, sodomy, heresy, and the invocation of demons. He would be hanged and then burned, but as a final mercy, his body would be removed from the flames before being completely consumed to allow for a Christian burial. On the morning of October 26, Gilles de Rais was taken to the execution site on the Île de Beaulieu in Nantes. A crowd of thousands gathered to witness the end of the monster who had terrorized the region for nearly a decade. Among the onlookers were many parents who had lost their children to the Marshal's demonic appetites. As he ascended the scaffold, Gilles de Rais still retained some vestiges of his former aristocratic dignity. He had confessed in prison, received last rites, and declared his intention to die a repentant Christian. He addressed the crowd in a firm voice, admitting his crimes and advising the young present not to follow his example. "Young men who hear me," he said, his voice echoing over the sea of angry faces, "take warning from me and beware of falling into the abyss into which I have fallen.
I have been seduced by the devil since my youth, and now I pay the price for my weakness and my wickedness." As the rope was placed around his neck, Gilles de Rais closed his eyes and murmured a prayer. Some accounts report that his last words were a plea for forgiveness directed at the souls of the children he had killed. The executioner pulled the lever, and the body of the man who had once been a hero of France swung in the cold autumn wind. His body was removed from the flames as promised and buried in a simple ceremony at the Carmelite church in Nantes. Even in death, Gilles de Rais continued to generate controversy. Some believed he had genuinely repented and deserved divine forgiveness, while others argued that his crimes were unforgivable and that his soul was eternally damned. The death of Gilles de Rais did not bring immediate closure to the horrors he had perpetrated. In the following years, more children's bodies were discovered buried on the grounds of his castles, suggesting that the true number of his victims may have been even greater than imagined. Tiffauges was abandoned and eventually demolished, but local residents continued to report strange phenomena in the area. Children's cries echoing on windless nights, shadows moving where there should be nothing, and a persistent smell of death that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. Francesco Prelati, the Italian cleric who had corrupted Gilles de Rais, escaped execution but was sentenced to life imprisonment. He outlived his mentor by many years, but according to prison guard accounts, he never fully recovered his sanity. He spent hours conversing with unseen voices and scratching strange symbols into his cell walls with his fingernails. The story of Gilles de Rais became a sinister legend that spread across Europe, inspiring countless ballads, plays, and horror tales. He was often linked to Bluebeard, the murderous nobleman of fairy tales, and his story contributed to the image of the decadent aristocrat that would become an archetype of Gothic literature. But beyond its cultural significance, the case of Gilles de Rais represents something far deeper and more disturbing about human nature. It demonstrates how even the most privileged, educated, and respected individuals can harbor capacities for evil that defy any rational understanding. His transformation from national hero to genocidal monster reveals the fragility of civilization and how easily moral structures can crumble when confronted with disillusionment, absolute power, and corrupting influences. Gilles de Rais's trajectory also brutally illustrates the concept of absolute power corrupting absolutely. As one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in France, he had become effectively untouchable, able to commit atrocities for years without facing consequences. His social standing provided him not only the means to commit his crimes, but also a shield that enabled his impunity for nearly a decade. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect of this whole story is the normalcy with which Gilles de Rais maintained his public facade while secretly perpetrating his horrors. He was not a mad hermit living in isolation from society, but a respected member of the aristocracy who regularly interacted with kings, bishops, and other nobles. This capacity for compartmentalization suggests a psychological coldness that is far more frightening than mere madness. The story also reveals how medieval society, despite its purported Christian piety, was willing to ignore obvious signs of atrocity when it suited its interests. For years, local and ecclesiastical authorities received reports of suspicious disappearances, but preferred not to investigate a man as powerful as Gilles de Rais. It was only when he committed crimes against the aristocratic class itself that justice finally acted. In the centuries that followed, psychologists and historians have attempted to understand how a man could descend so deeply into the abyss of depravity. Some theories suggest that the death of Joan of Arc was the trigger that shattered his faith and sanity, while others point to childhood trauma or pre-existing psychological predispositions. But perhaps the truth is simpler and more terrifying. Gilles de Rais may have simply been a sociopath who, due to the specific historical circumstances of his time, had the opportunity and means to express his predatory nature on a truly apocalyptic scale. His story remains a dark reminder that evil does not always come disguised as an obviously grotesque monster. Sometimes it wears the mask of respectability, hides behind noble titles and charming smiles, and operates in the shadows of palaces and castles that should represent order and civilization. Gilles de Rais proved that humanity's greatest horrors can be perpetrated not by savage barbarians, but by men whom society considers its best representatives. The echo of his crimes resonates even today, not merely as a macabre historical curiosity, but a dark mirror reflecting the darkest possibilities of the human condition. In every era, in every society, there are individuals with the potential to become new Gilles de Rais, contained only by the moral and legal structures that civilization builds to protect itself. And perhaps this is the most important lesson we can draw from this terrible story, that barbarity is not a primitive condition that we have overcome through progress, but an ever-present possibility that lurks in the shadows of the human soul, waiting only for the right moment to emerge and transform angels into demons, heroes into monsters, and pastels into torture chambers. The name of Gilles de Rais remains etched in history, not as the hero he once was, but as one of the cruelest murderers to ever walk the earth, an eternal reminder that, in the words of a medieval chronicler, hell is not in the depths of the earth, but in the hearts of men who choose to inhabit it.